Inside a quiet apartment in Virginia, Keiona Braxton was ending the year with dreams bigger than ever before. She was 26, hard-working, and just a step away from a major promotion at her job. A wedding was on the horizon, and there was an even greater joy. She had recently discovered that she was going to be a mother. It should have been a time of excitement, a season of happiness. But before the sun could rise on the first morning of the new year, everything changed. When firefighters arrived at the apartment just after dawn, they expected to battle flames, maybe rescue someone trapped inside. They weren't prepared for what they found. A fire had been set deliberately. Smoke poured from the upstairs bedroom, but the true horror was waiting in another part of the home. Lying near the patio door, Keiona Braxton was dead. The scene was brutal. The kind of violence that didn't just happen. It meant something. Someone had wanted her to suffer. The autopsy would reveal a level of cruelty that left even seasoned investigators unsettled. She had been beaten, stabbed over 40 times, and shot. Almost every stab wound was in one place, her abdomen. The same place that carried her unborn child. Who could have done this? Why would someone go to such lengths? And why, even after the fire was set to destroy evidence, did it feel like whoever did this wanted it to be known? This is the story of Keiona Braxton, a woman with everything to live for, a life stolen in the most violent way, and a case that left more questions than answers, a life full of promise, a future waiting to unfold. And in one night, it was all gone. Keiona Braxton had worked hard for everything she had. She wasn't just moving forward, she was on the verge of something great. She was 26, determined, and building the life she had always dreamed of. Her job was more than just a paycheck. She took pride in what she did, and it showed. Management had taken notice, and soon, she was expecting a well-earned promotion. More responsibility. More stability. A step closer to the success she had always wanted. Her personal life was just as full. She had a man she planned to marry, and soon they would be a family. The pregnancy had come as a surprise, but it was a welcome one. She had shared the news with the people closest to her, unable to hide her excitement. A new year was approaching, and with it, a new chapter. But she never got to turn that page. Keiona's story wasn't supposed to end here. But someone made sure it did. Before we continue, drop a comment below. Let us know where you are tuning in from and the time. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. To understand what happened, it's important to know who was in Keiona's life. The people closest to her. The ones who should have protected her. And the one who may have wanted her gone. Keiona Braxton. She was more than what happened to her. She was the kind of person who left an impression. Friends and family described her as hard-working, full of life, and always put together. She had an eye for detail, whether it was a fresh set of nails, a perfectly styled outfit, or the way she carried herself. She had goals, and she worked toward them. She didn't expect handouts. Every step she took in life, she earned. Her relationship with Kenny Lee was something she believed in. It wasn't perfect, no relationship is, but they had plans. Marriage was in the picture. A child was on the way. And despite any challenges, she was ready to embrace the future. But love isn't always enough. And sometimes, the past refuses to stay where it belongs. Kenny Lee. He was the man she had chosen. The man who was supposed to be by her side. Kenny Lee and Keiona had built a life together, but he wasn't just her boyfriend. He was also a father. Before Keiona, there had been another woman. Another relationship. And from that, a child, a little girl named Michaela. The mother of that child was Kayla Armstrong. To some, their history was just that, history. But not everyone lets go so easily. By the time Kenny met Keiona, he had already left Kayla behind. But the breakup wasn't simple. Kayla wasn't done with him. And she wasn't ready to accept someone else in his life. Keiona had stepped into a situation that was already tense. And with a baby on the way, that tension was about to explode. Kayla Armstrong. She had once been the one Kenny loved, the mother of his child, and in her mind, the only woman who should have had a place in his life. When he left her, she wasn't ready to let go. She made that clear in ways no one could ignore. It wasn't just words. It was actions. 18 months before Keiona was murdered, Kayla Armstrong attacked her. Not an argument. Not a push. An attack so violent that Keiona needed 22 stitches in her head. It should have ended there. But it didn't. When Kayla got out of jail, the threats didn't stop. The messages kept coming. The anger never faded. Keiona saw what was happening. She knew the risk. She went to the police. She went to court. She asked for protection. And 3 days before her death, it happened again. Kayla Armstrong had stormed into their apartment. Another fight. Another warning. 3 days later, Keiona was dead. This wasn't just jealousy. This was something much worse. And before it was over, it would cost more than one life. The new year had just begun. Across the city, people were celebrating, making resolutions, looking ahead to the future. But inside one apartment in Henrico County, Virginia, the future had already been stolen. At 6 a.m., neighbors noticed something was wrong. Smoke was pouring from an upstairs window. It wasn't the kind that drifts lazily from a forgotten candle or a meal left too long on the stove. It was thick, dark, growing fast. Someone called 911. Firefighters arrived within minutes. They forced their way inside, expecting to find an accident, maybe an electrical fire, maybe someone asleep, unaware of the danger. They weren't prepared for what they found. The flames were mostly contained in the upstairs bedroom, but that wasn't the real emergency. As they moved through the home, they saw the signs. Blood. A lot of it. And then, in the back of the apartment near the patio door, they saw her. Keiona Braxton. She wasn't breathing. She wasn't moving. And it was clear that nothing could be done to save her. But this wasn't just a fire. This wasn't just a death. This was something else entirely. Investigators arrived soon after, walking into a scene that was worse than they could have imagined. Keiona hadn't just been killed. She had been attacked with a level of violence that told a story all on its own. The fire upstairs had been set deliberately. Someone wanted to destroy evidence. The gas range in the kitchen had been turned on, but the knobs were missing. Whoever did this had taken them, making sure no one could easily shut off the gas. Inside the oven, something even more disturbing. Several aerosol cans had been shoved inside, placed in a way that suggested one goal: an explosion. But it didn't work. The fire spread, but not fast enough to consume everything. Not fast enough to erase the truth. The full horror of what had happened was revealed in the medical examination. 12 blows to the head. 43 stab wounds. A gunshot to the abdomen. Almost every stab wound was in the same place, her stomach. She had been carrying life inside her. And whoever did this knew that. They knew exactly where to strike. This wasn't random. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. This was personal. Someone wanted her gone. And someone wanted to make sure her unborn child never took a breath. The apartment was quiet now. The fire had been put out, the smoke had cleared, but the questions were just beginning. Keiona Braxton was gone, and the way she had been taken from this world left no doubt. Someone had wanted her to suffer. Someone had planned this. Someone had stood in that apartment with her and made sure she would never leave it alive. Henrico County Police had seen their share of tragedies, but this was different. The level of violence, the fire, the gas, the missing stove knobs, this was no ordinary crime. This was personal. and whoever was responsible had gone to great lengths to cover their tracks. Detectives started with the obvious question: who would want Keiona dead? The answer, at first, seemed clear. When a woman is killed, the first person investigators look at is often the one closest to her. Kenny Lee. Her boyfriend. The father of her unborn child. The man she was planning to marry. It made sense. If there had been problems in their relationship, if he didn't want the baby, if he had been seeing someone else, there were countless reasons why he might have wanted her gone. Detectives didn't have to look far for a motive. Keiona's own sister, Temil Smith, had noticed something about him. She couldn't put her finger on it, but there was something about Kenny that made her uneasy. She had always felt like he was hiding something. And there was more. Keiona had told her family that when she first told Kenny about the pregnancy, he hadn't been happy. He already had a child, a little girl named Michaela, from a previous relationship with a woman named Kayla Armstrong. Had the thought of another child been too much? Had he decided that life with Keiona, as a father of two, wasn't what he wanted? Detectives needed answers. They brought Kenny in for questioning. They watched him closely. His body language. His tone. Every word. He told them he had been out of town that night, making a delivery near Philadelphia for work. It was a convenient alibi. Too convenient. So they checked. They pulled his phone records. They looked at GPS data. They contacted his employer. They checked hotel receipts. Everything lined up. His phone had been in Pennsylvania. His job confirmed he had been working that night. There were receipts proving where he had stayed. The deliveries had been made on schedule. There was no way he could have been in Virginia at the time of the murder. Detectives had no choice but to let him go. Kenny Lee was not their suspect. But before he left, they had one more question. Did he know anyone who would want to hurt Keiona? He didn't hesitate. Kayla Armstrong. His ex. The mother of his child. The woman he had left behind when he started a new life with Keiona. And that's when the pieces started coming together. Kayla had never truly accepted the breakup. To her, Kenny belonged to her. He always had. And in her mind, no one, especially not Keiona, was going to change that. The jealousy had turned to anger. The anger had turned to violence. 18 months before the murder, the two women had fought. It wasn't just words. It wasn't just shouting. Kayla had grabbed a knife and stabbed Keiona in the head. 22 stitches. Kayla had been arrested, charged, and sent to jail. But when she got out, she wasn't done. Keiona had been afraid. She had gone to the police. She had filed reports. She had asked for a restraining order. She had told the court again and again that Kayla was dangerous. And just 3 days before the murder, Kayla had stormed into the apartment again. Another fight. Another attack. This time, Kenny had to step in to pull them apart. Now, just days later, Keiona was dead. And Kayla Armstrong was the last person standing in her way. Keiona had done everything she could. She had gone to the police. She had told the courts. She had warned everyone around her. Kayla Armstrong was dangerous. But warnings were not enough. Now, Keiona was gone, and the person she feared most was walking free. The police had no eyewitnesses. No fingerprints. No DNA. The crime scene had been burned, the evidence destroyed. What remained was a tangled web of threats, past violence, and a history that pointed to one person. But in the eyes of the law, suspicion wasn't enough. Kayla Armstrong had been arrested, but not for murder. She had been charged with assault for the fight that happened 3 days before Keiona's death. It was something, but it wasn't justice. Detectives knew they needed more. They needed something that would hold up in court. 6 months passed. The case against Kayla stalled. Without physical evidence linking her to the crime, it was one person's word against another's. Then, a blow to the investigation. A judge dismissed the assault charge. He didn't believe there was enough proof to say who had started the fight. Kayla was released from jail. And now, she was harder to reach. Witnesses who once spoke freely became hesitant. People who had once told police about Kayla's rage, her threats, her obsession with Kenny. Suddenly, they weren't so sure what they had seen. Fear had settled in. Years passed. Keiona's family waited. They lived with the pain of knowing the person responsible for her death had never faced justice. And then, everything changed. A new prosecutor took over the case. He looked at the files, the interviews, the statements. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The case was built on pieces, a phone call here, a confrontation there. No single moment proved Kayla was guilty. But together, those moments painted a picture. A picture of a woman who refused to let go. A woman who believed no one would ever take Kenny from her. And a woman who, on the night of December 31, 2008, had made sure of it. Kayla Armstrong was indicted. But she wasn't there to hear it. She was gone. When police arrived to arrest her, they found nothing. She had disappeared. No one knew where she had gone. No one admitted to helping her. 4 days, officers searched. Then weeks. Then months. Keiona's family had waited years for justice, and now it was slipping away again. But Kayla couldn't run forever. On January 20, 2012, U.S. Marshals tracked her to a friend's house. Inside, they searched every room. They looked under beds, inside closets, behind furniture. And then, they found her. Curled up in a closet, hiding. She had spent years thinking she had escaped justice. But now, there was nowhere left to run. Kayla Armstrong sat in court, facing the charges she had avoided for so long. But this case was different from most. There was no DNA, no security footage, no fingerprints. The prosecution had to build their argument piece by piece, relying on past incidents, phone records, and her own actions before and after the crime. The night before Keiona's murder, Kayla had made phone calls. Not to friends. Not to family. To Keiona's neighbors. She wanted to know if Kenny was home that night. And then, there was what happened after her arrest. While she was in jail, waiting for trial, police uncovered something even more disturbing. Kayla Armstrong had tried to hire someone to kill Kenny Lee. She knew he planned to testify against her. And she wanted to make sure that never happened. But the person she had spoken to wasn't just another inmate. He was an informant. And now, that conversation would be used against her in court. The prosecution had what they needed. But what happened next would leave Keiona's family with mixed emotions. Keiona Braxton was gone. The woman accused of taking her life had been found, arrested, and charged. But years had passed since that night. Memories faded. Witnesses hesitated. Would there be justice? Or would the truth slip away once again? Kayla Armstrong sat in the courtroom, facing the charges she had spent years running from. The prosecution laid out the case. Keiona had been excited for the future. A promotion at work. A baby on the way. A wedding to plan. But all of it had been taken from her in an attack meant to erase every trace of her existence. A fire had been set to cover up the crime. But even flames couldn't hide what had been done. The autopsy revealed the truth. Keiona had suffered before she died. The attack had been personal. And there was only one person who had threatened to hurt her before. Kayla had sent messages. She had confronted Keiona in public. She had spoken to people who lived near her. She had tried to find out where she was on that night. The jury listened. But the defense pushed back. There was no physical evidence. No fingerprints. No weapon. No one had seen Kayla enter that apartment. The case relied on patterns, on behavior, on words spoken in anger. Was it enough? Kayla Armstrong had a choice. She could go to trial, risk a guilty verdict, and spend the rest of her life in prison. Or she could take a deal. She didn't admit guilt. She didn't say she did it. Instead, she entered what was known as an Alford plea. She accepted the punishment while maintaining her innocence. If you like this story, don't forget to support me by subscribing to this channel. Also like and share this video to your friends and relatives. For Keiona's family, it wasn't the full justice they had hoped for. But it meant one thing. Kayla Armstrong would spend 30 years in prison. She wouldn't be able to hurt anyone else. Keiona's mother sat in court as the sentence was read. She had fought for years. She had spoken her daughter's name when others tried to forget. She had made sure no one would ignore what had been done. Now, it is over. The person responsible had been caught, punished. But there was no celebration, no relief. Because Keiona was still gone. And nothing would bring her back. Justice had come. But it had taken far too long. And for those left behind, the pain would never fade. Keiona Braxton had been full of life. She had dreams, a future, a child on the way. But all of that was taken in a single night. Her family was left to pick up the pieces. Her mother sat in an empty home, surrounded by photos of a daughter who would never walk through the door again. Her father, once strong and steady, carried a sadness in his eyes that would never fade. Her fiancé, the man she had planned to marry, struggled to move forward. He had imagined a life with her, a wedding, a home, a child. Now, there was only silence. Her friends still spoke her name. They told stories of her laughter, her kindness, the way she made every room feel warm. But their voices always grew quiet when they reached the end, when they had to say the words no one wanted to say. She was gone. The community felt it too. People had followed the case. They had prayed for justice. They had watched as the years passed, as the trial dragged on, as the person responsible fought to escape the truth. Some felt relief when the sentence was handed down. Others felt frustration. 30 years was a long time, but it wasn't enough. Nothing would be enough. Because Keiona should have been here. She should have been holding her child. Celebrating birthdays. Living the life she had worked so hard to build. Her story wasn't the only one. Too many women had been hurt before their voices could be heard. Too many families had been left waiting, hoping for justice that might never come. Domestic violence didn't always leave bruises. Sometimes it was words spoken in anger. A threat disguised as a joke. A name whispered through clenched teeth. Sometimes it ended with a life stolen too soon. And too often, the warning signs were ignored. Keiona's case showed how fragile justice could be. How hard it was to prove what had happened when there were no cameras, no eyewitnesses, no confessions. It showed how easy it was to walk away from responsibility. To say, I didn't do it, even when the truth sat just beneath the surface. It showed that even when the law worked, it didn't always feel like enough. Her family carried the weight of that truth every single day. But they also carried her memory. They spoke her name. They told her story. And they made sure no one would forget. Because Keiona Braxton should still be here. And that is something no one should ever forget. This is where the story ends for now. But the conversation does not have to. Keiona Braxton's life was stolen. A family was left grieving. A community was left asking questions. And justice, if you can call it that, came at a cost. Now, the question is for you. Do you believe justice was truly served? 30 years behind bars. No full confession. No true sense of closure. Does that feel like enough? Or does it leave something missing? And more importantly, how do we stop this from happening again? How do we protect the ones who are crying out for help before it's too late? How do we recognize the warning signs? How do we make sure that another woman, another mother, another daughter does not become just another case? There are too many names. Too many stories like this one. Keiona's life mattered. Her child's life mattered. And this case, no matter how long it has been, still matters. So let's talk about it. Share your thoughts. Share your ideas. Share what you believe should change. Because silence helps no one. And if there's one thing this case has shown, it's that some voices should never be ignored.